Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. This week, I want to talk about pushing back against the pushback. Now, in my book, Black Belt Secrets of Success, I tell the story of having the privilege of meeting Sir Edmund Hillary Jr. a few years ago. Now, if you don't know the name, Sir Edmund Hillary Jr. is the son of Sir Edmund Hillary, who is the very first person to successfully climb Mount Everest. In chapter 3 of my book, I talk about climbing your own Mount Everest of success. Now, at 29,029 feet, Mount Everest is truly the tallest place on earth. I've had an opportunity to talk to not only Sir Edmund Hillary Jr., but other people who have successfully summited Everest. They all tell me the same thing. They say, John, it is an inhospitable place, perhaps the most inhospitable place on earth. Sub-zero temperatures and some of the most extreme environmental conditions you're ever going to face in any endeavor you would attempt on planet Earth. Now, I learned recently that of the 700 to 1,000 people every year who attempt to climb to the summit of Mount Everest, only 60 to 70% of those who start actually have the opportunity to summit the mountain. Now, Mount Everest, to be able to climb it, it's not a one-day event. An expedition to summit Mount Everest is about a 2-month endeavor. Why 2 months? Well, depending on the route taken, there's a period of time that's involved. The weather conditions are going to dictate how often and how soon you can travel, or whether you can travel at all up the mountain. How quickly you climatize to the enhanced altitude that you're going to be at is going to determine how quickly and how far you can climb. And you've got to have patience, I'm told by many of the climbers, because you've got to wait for just the ideal time to prepare for the final ascent. Once you get to Camp 4 and begin to ascend above Camp 4, you're in what is called the death zone. And in the death zone, your body is literally dying as you're climbing to the summit of Mount Everest. You can only spend a limited amount of time from Camp 4 to the top and back down to Camp 4 before your body literally gives out. Now, if you think about that in itself, that's an endeavor. But even to get to that process, it's an 8 to 10 day hike from where you fly into Nepal to hike to Everest Base Camp. Now, Everest Base Camp is located on the south side of Nepal. And when the climbers get there, they start to acclimate to the thinner atmosphere. That can take days, that can take weeks. But once they get to base camp and they climatize, they now begin to spend several weeks making rotational climbs up and down the mountain. Now, this I found intriguing because they would cross the ice field and go to Camp 1. They would spend some time at Camp 1 and they would return to base camp. And then they would go back and repeat the same route, going back across this dangerous ice field, going to Camp 1, perhaps climbing to Camp 2, and then climbing back down to Camp 1, and sometimes returning to base camp. Again, it's that climatization and getting used to the thinner atmosphere at the different levels that you're climbing. But once the team that's climbing the mountain had finally climatized, the push to the summit, once they begin to push above Camp 2 or Camp 3, adds about another week to the climb. But even if they're successful in getting to the top of Mount Everest, the climbers now face one of the most daunting tasks of all, and that's traversing down the mountain over a 4 to 6 day period. Over half of all deaths, in fact, 56% of all of the deaths on Mount Everest occur during the descent. Now, that's usually related to fatigue, complacency, and harsh weather, or a combination of the three. So when we think about climbing Mount Everest, what is it? It is an exercise in resistance. Because as these climbers are going up and down the mountain, what are they doing? They're fighting the pull of gravity. They're straining against the brutal elements, and they're pushing against their physical, mental, and emotional limits and struggling to avoid exhaustion. What are they doing? They're pushing back against the pushback. And that's the title of this week's lesson. Now, a diamond is the hardest surface known to man. If you rank it on the Mohs scale, it scores a 10 out of 10. No other substance on the earth scores that high. Now, diamond is composed of carbon atoms that are tightly bound together. They form a three-dimensional network, and this makes these carbon atoms in this network arrangement resistant to scratching or penetration. Interestingly enough, the hardest substance known to man starts as a lump of coal. Now, coal is a sedimentary rock, and it's primarily composed of carbon. It's a fossil fuel that was formed when the remains of plants died millions and millions of years ago. To turn coal into a diamond, it requires a few things. Well, number one, it requires the coal itself. But secondly, it requires pressure. 725,000 pounds of pressure per square inch or more is needed to be exerted to force those carbon atoms into a diamond crystal structure. Now, not only is force required, the process of turning coal into a diamond also requires extreme temperature, at least 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So where do we find this extreme pressure and this extreme heat? Well, it happens to happen naturally in the Earth's mantle, the inner part of the Earth. In between the crust and the core is this thick area known as the mantle. It is an area of high pressure and high temperature, perfect for the formation of diamonds. So what happens? The mantle pushes against the lump of coal, but the coal pushes back. If the coal did not push back against the mantle, it would crush into dust and the diamond wouldn't be formed. So the carbon atoms in the coal push back against the pressure and the heat. And in this process, those atoms are compacted to form the crystalline structure that we know as a diamond. But without the heat, without the pressure, and without the resistance of the carbon atoms pushing back against the heat and the pressure, a diamond would never be formed. It's resistance that makes this possible. Now, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers made history. They were the first individuals to successfully sustain flight in what is known to as a manned, heavier-than-air vehicle that was powered and controlled. It was an aircraft they dubbed the Kitty Hawk for the place in which they flew. Now, this moment in time, December 17th, 1903, marked the beginning of the age of aviation, and it transformed the way you and I traverse around the world. But guess what made air flight possible? Yeah, you probably guessed it. It was resistance. A plane's wing generates lift because of a curved shape called the airfoil on the top of the wing. In this shape, flat on the bottom, curved on the top, as the wing passes through the air and resists the air flows faster over the top of the wing than it does underneath. And as air speeds up, pressure drops. So the air pressure above the wing is lower than the air pressure exerted below the wing as the plane increases its speed. This upward force is the result that lifts the wing into the air. Now, I learned a few years ago from a friend of mine that is a pilot that airplanes take off into the wind to maximize this lift. They want to maximize the flow of air over the wing so they get the airplane into the air faster. And I was told by my friend Philip, by flying into a headwind, it generates more lift at lower ground speeds. This allows for a shorter takeoff distance so the plane can get into the air much faster. And it is this process of taking off, flying into the wind, that makes the liftoff safer, faster, and more efficient. So by pushing against the force of the wind, by resisting the wind itself, the plane takes flight. Now, 66 years later, 66 years after Kitty Hawk and the very first man-powered flight, mankind walked on the surface of the moon for the very first time. We as a species overcame the forces of gravity. We overcame the vacuum of space. And in doing so, we allowed Neil Armstrong to step from the lunar lander to place man's first footprints on another world. So by pushing against the force of gravity and resisting the vacuum, the emptiness of space, we successfully sent a crew of astronauts 238,900 miles to, as I would borrow a phrase from Star Trek, boldly go where no man has gone before. So how did we do that? We pushed back against the pushback. So what am I trying to tell you here, and what's the lesson for today? Understand this. Throughout life, you and I are going to experience headwinds. There are going to be times when people try to push us down. There are going to be circumstances and situations that we face that come against us that seem almost insurmountable. They push against us, and it's up to us to push back. There are going to be times in life when you and I may feel pressure as it seems like life is crashing down all around us and maybe on top of us. Well, here's what I'm here to tell you. You and I are all going to experience resistance. We're all going to experience pushbacks at some point in life. But it's how you and I respond to the resistance. It's how you and I respond to those pushbacks. It's going to say a lot about who we are and who we're becoming. Being a black belt leader is learning to push back against the pushbacks. You know, interestingly enough, I love my car, and I love my car because it's a Camaro. It's 6 on the floor, and it can go pretty fast. But inside that car is a combustion engine. And that combustion engine resists the internal pressure that is caused when fuel is ignited by a spark that is combined with the air inside of a piston that causes that piston to move up and down, that turns the gears that moves my Camaro forward. It's the same in every vehicle, and it's the same in every engine. Now, uncontrolled and uncontained, this explosive force of fire and air and a combustible material like gasoline can be very destructive. But when it's controlled and when it's contained, it drives the engines of success. And in the very same manner, in the very same fashion, you and I can take the external pressures that we may face in life, and we can use those pressures to our advantage. Yes, uncontrolled, uncontained, those pressures can be destructive. They can be detrimental to our welfare and our well-being. But when we learn to exert control over those very same pressures, they serve as a source of incredible power and energy that allows us to move forward. So think about it this way. Coal becomes a diamond under pressure. An airplane takes off against the wind and uses the lift to fly to great heights. A tire resists the force of gravity and friction to move an automobile forward. A rocket pushes against the force of gravity to propel a spaceship into the vastness of space. Well, here's what I'm here to tell you. You and I can do the very same things. You and I, as black belt leaders in life, can learn to push back against the pushback. We can learn to resist the resistance. Let me give you an example. My daughter Jessie has been recently training for a 10K race. Now, when she first started out training for this race, she was only able to run a very short distance before the force of gravity, the resistance of the wind, and the heat of the summer day took its toll on her body. She would run for a while, and then she would stop, and then she would walk, and then she would run, and then she would walk. But as she continued day in and day out to push back against the pushback, here's what happened. Her endurance increased. She suddenly found it wasn't just a few blocks she could run, but she could run a full kilometer. And then before you knew it, she could run a 2.5 kilometer distance without even getting tired. A few more weeks later, being persistent in doing daily what she knew she had to do, she found she could run 5K without stopping. Now, not only did her endurance increase in this process, but her speed at running increased as well. And by the time she went to run her 10K race, she was already running 10K distances several times a week and improving her time every single time her feet pounded the pavement. So what happened? She resisted the resistance. She did what she needed to do pushing back against the pushback until it became so easy she didn't realize she was pushing back. Now, let me say that again because that's something I want you to get, and that's an important part of today's lesson. She did what she needed to do, pushing back against the pushback day after day after day until it became so easy she didn't realize she was pushing back. And you and I can do the very same thing. You do what you need to do to push back against the pushback day after day after day until it becomes so easy to do you don't realize you're pushing back. Remember, the goal of being a black belt leader in life is to maintain progress under pressure. But to maintain progress under pressure, it requires something of you and it requires something of me. It requires something of all of us. It requires that we use the resistance that we're experiencing and we leverage it to our advantage. I mean, think about weightlifting. Weightlifting uses weights to make us stronger. The same thing if you're using resistance bands. Very same principle applies. What are we doing? We're pushing against the force of gravity being exerted on the weights or being exerted by those resistance bands trying to contract as we're trying to expand them. And in the process, it strengthens our muscles. It makes them stronger. And guess what? The more we do it, the stronger we get. And over time, the easier it becomes to lift that weight or to stretch that band. So what am I trying to tell you? Your destiny, your successful future is on the other side of the pushback that you're facing right now. So you got a choice. You can either passively accept what life is bringing your way right now, and you can allow that to dictate and determine how your life's going to turn out, or you can choose, like black belt leaders do, to use what life throws at you, to use that to your advantage, and to take control of the person that you're becoming in the process. Yes, resistance is going to happen. It's a part of life. Things are going to come our way we don't like, that are going to be uncomfortable. We can't always stop external pressures from coming our way, but we can choose to control them, to contain them, and to use them to our advantage, just like a combustion engine, to turn that external pressure into power that we can use and control and go to the next step in our journey towards more success. You know, growing up, my mom always told me trials and tribulations, rightly used, help us grow. What was she saying? The obstacles and challenges of life that you and I face every day, if we use them the right way, they're going to make us better, faster, and stronger. You know, legendary coach John Wooden, UCLA's great basketball coach, said it well. When opportunity presents itself, it's too late to prepare. Now, Coach Wooden knew from experience that opportunity often shows up disguised as a problem to be solved or a challenge to be overcome. But if you're not prepared, guess what? You can't win the game. So it was in the daily preparation on the court that his players learned to push back against the pushback. And in doing so, they grew themselves as a team and they grew themselves as individual leaders on and off the court. The end result of all of that preparation, UCLA went on as a team to win 10 NCAA championships in 12 years, including 7 in a row under the leadership and tutelage of Coach John Wooden. Understand this. We're going to face resistance, and how we respond to resistance says a lot about who we are becoming in the process. Now, what do I mean by that? Understand this. Resistance is the stage in life where your character is going to be revealed. It's where your preparation or the lack of your preparation is going to show up. It's like my daughter Jessie training to run a 10K race. We continue to push forward, resisting the forces against us that are trying to hold us back or push us down. Why do we do that? Because we know that with each successful day of learning, of growing, of training, and improving, we're becoming a better version of who we are and what we do. Remember, successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. And when we learn to push back against the pushback, and we do that every single day, we become better today than we were yesterday. And knowing that as we continue the process, we're going to become a better version of who we are and what we do tomorrow. And if we do this day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, this process of learning and growing and developing ourselves, pushing back against the pushback, it becomes so easy we don't realize we're pushing back. It's progress under pressure. It's the relentless pursuit of excellence. It's what black belt leaders do. They push back against the pushback. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.